7 seals have to be broken before the contents of the scroll can be opened. That's one of the reasons why I believe that the motif described here is that the seals don't represent the wrath of God. They represent the preconditions necessary for the scroll to be opened and accessed, and then the day of the Lord, which is the contents of the scroll, can be accessed by Yeshua, and then poured out on planet Earth with the purpose of defeating Satan and his Antichrist, who have usurped authority of the earth. And Yeshua says, nope, I want it back. It's mine. I'm going to redeem it. I've won it. I deserve it because I poured out my very lifeblood for those who dwell on the earth. And therefore, it's mine. Give it back. And Satan will have no choice but to relinquish his control over this planet, right? Amen. So let's go look at Brother Eggman's blog post. The terror that the people of the world experience during the day of the Lord is also described in Isaiah 2:10 through 12 and 17 through 18. So let's read about the day of the Lord, realizing that the day of the Lord is markedly distinct from the tribulation. There's an easy way to remember this principle. The tribulation is Satan declaring war on God. By comparison and contrast, the day of the Lord, the wrath of God, is God declaring war on Satan. You could see it this way as well. Either one of these ones works for you, I hope. The tribulation is Antichrist's wrath against God's people. And the day of the Lord is God's wrath against the wicked people, against Satan's people. So let's read Isaiah and talk about better understand the day of the Lord. Remember, this is something that goes all the way back to the Old Testament. Isaiah 2:10 through 12, as well as 17 to 21. Isaiah says, "Go into the rocks, hide in the ground from the fearful presence of the Lord and the splendor of his majesty." Notice we just read this we're going to read it again in I didn't say we just read it, but does Eggman quote it again? He doesn't. Give me a second. I'm going to pull up a second passage that Brother Eggman didn't pull. It's in Revelation chapter 6. Let me back up. I'm going too fast. In Revelation chapter 6, this is the opening of the scroll in the sequential steps of cracking each seal open one by one, which the Lamb himself is opening, which pre-tribbers want to argue is proof that this is the wrath of God because only Yeshua is worthy to pour out the wrath of God, and therefore, since he's the one only worthy to open the seals, this must be definitive proof that this is the wrath of God. But I find problems with that assertion. I think it is a reading into the text too much, and it's speculation. There's nothing in the text that says that the seals are the wrath of God. But what we can infer when we get to the 5th and 6th seals, looking at the martyr's response as well as God's response, and then when we get to the 6th seal, we have the actions of the earth dwellers. I think we can ascertain from those details that the wrath is commencing after the seals have been broken. So we got 1st seal, 2nd seal, 3rd seal, 4th seal. We'll look at these in time. Don't worry, I'm going through them fast. 5th seal, 6th seal. And the 6th seal is the one that gives the most detail. And so it's worth reading the 6th seal before we jump into the book of Isaiah, because John in the 6th seal quotes the book of Isaiah, rather. Remember, it's the revelation of Yeshua. So Yeshua is giving the words to John. But John writes, quote, "And I looked when he broke the 6th seal, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became as black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place." That reference to the sky splitting apart like a scroll should be capitalized in this NASB 95 version. It isn't. I'm a bit disappointed, because it is also a quote from the Tanakh. But let's keep reading. "The kings of the earth and the eminent people and the commanders and the wealthy and the strong and every slave and every free person hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and the rocks," listen to this quote. This is Revelation. And this should also be capitalized. Shame on you in ASB. And they said to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the sight of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Regardless of how you translate that Greek phrase has come in verse 17, whether you think it's referring to something that happened already, something that has been ongoing, or still yet to come, like there's this expectation. The general sense of the aorist tense, the verb there is arrived, as in no tense is what aorist means. No tense. It doesn't focus on the time, just simply focuses on the actuality of the thing that happened. So has happened is fine. The wrath has happened, or has come, has arrived. Is at hand is a good translation. But what we're talking about is this response from the earth dwellers. Notice what they said. They hide in this cave and among the rocks, and they say, fall on the mountains, fall on us, and hide us from the sight of him who sits on the Lamb. Well, let's go back to Brother Eggman and look at Isaiah. Go into the rocks, hide in the ground from the fearful presence of the Lord and the splendor of his majesty. Sound familiar? Yeah. Isaiah prophesied that already. Then he continues, the eyes of the arrogant will be humbled and human pride brought low. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day. We're talking about the day of the Lord. The Lord Almighty has a day in store for all the proud and lofty, for all that is exalted. They will be humbled. The arrogance of man will be brought low and human pride humbled. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day. I love how Isaiah quotes God as repeating himself. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day. This is very important to establish that this is the day of the Lord, and it is his wrath alone that will be interpreted by the earth dwellers. In distinction, listen up very, very carefully. In distinction to the wrath of Satan, when the time comes for it to be poured out, the Antichrist will already be boastfully declaring to the entire world that he is very God and that you need to worship him. So he will be exalted in his day. Make no mistake. Satan will have his day. Antichrist will rule the world, and all the world will worship him. Not just follow him, but the book of Revelation uses a Greek word that translates into English as worship in a religious sense, in a spiritual sense. The world will follow after Satan as a god. They will give their allegiance to Antichrist as very God ruling on planet Earth. In other words, it's a perverse incarnation from that perspective. And it's important to realize that the wrath of Satan and the day and the tribulation time period is marked not only by Satan's rule and by Antichrist's declaration of being God and the wrath of Satan being poured out against anyone who disagrees with what he says, namely Jews and Christians, but the exaltation of Satan in his day is something that God actually allows and gives permission to do. Satan is given this time. Antichrist is given this time, and God allows it. So for a brief moment, a very short time, I'm trying to emphasize this so you can catch it. Part of the way we understand these different sections, what sections am I talking about? I'm talking about separating, let's go back up to this chart. I'm talking about separating the Great Tribulation, which is the wrath of Satan, and distinguishing it from the wrath of God, which is the day of the Lord. Each of these two segments are marked out by who is going to be exalted in what time frame. During the Great Tribulation, Satan will be exalted. Antichrist will be ruling. People will be worshiping him. But by comparison, we just read it here in Isaiah, when God's wrath is poured out on the day of the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. He's not going to allow Satan to exalt himself anymore. That's why he cuts the tribulation short and renders Antichrist essentially useless until God needs them again at the Battle of Armageddon to just embarrass him by kicking him and the false prophet alive into the lake of fire. Let's keep reading Isaiah here. Verse 18, and the idols will totally disappear, right? This is also a difference. During the Great Tribulation, idolatry will be worldwide. I mean, massive idolatry, worship of Satan, worship of the Antichrist, all those little idols, the image of the beast that's erected worldwide. There should be, I'm factoring there might be some giant representational beast in Jerusalem in the temple beast, idol image or something to that effect that the book of Revelation talks about. And in conjunction, the Greek allows for there to be little representational idols scattered throughout the world in representation of the larger one that's in Jerusalem. And these will be demon-controlled idols, as far as I can tell. But the point being is idolatry itself will be rife in the earth, and God will allow it. God will allow idolatry to rise to unprecedented heights in those days prior to the coming of the day of the Lord, prior to the rapture, by the way. So idolatry will be the one of the marked characteristics of Satan's day, of his day of tribulation only for believers and for Jews and Christians, but for the rest of the world, primarily it'll be peace and safety, because you will have taken the mark and you will be living comfortably in the eighth beast, one new world orders that one world government that Satan will have established under his minion Antichrist. So notice the idols will totally disappear in the day of the Lord. He's going to put an end to all that. It's time to mop up. It's time to clean up and to put an end to Satan and all of wickedness and bring in the everlasting righteous kingdom that starts with the millennium, but then carries on into perpetuity, carries on into eternity. People will flee to the caves and the rocks and to the holes in the ground from the fearful. There we have it again, this language that we see that shows up in that already shows up, that's going to show up again in the book of Revelation. People will flee to caves and the rocks and the holes in the ground from the fearful presence of the Lord and the splendor of his majesty when he rises to shake the earth. I want to say this also in interjection. You post-tribbers who are so easily confused about the rapture versus the second coming, and you can't seem to get your details straight, and I'm kind of poking at you playfully for a reason, right? I still love you, so don't misunderstand the tone of my voice. But listen, during the tribulation, the days leading up to the rapture, during the tribulation, the people will be living in relative peace and safety, and that's their state of affairs. They'll be, what does Jesus say in Matthew 24? They'll be marrying, giving marriage, eating, drinking, living life as usual. It'll be business as usual to the extent that they are under the protection of the Antichrist and they've taken the mark. That's what I mean by life as usual. But for Jews and Christians, it'll be hell on earth. It'll be the worst that it's ever been and ever will be for those of us who are loyal to our God and loyal to his Messiah. So we'll have some polar opposite treatment of different people groups on the earth. Christians and Jews, it'll be our worst time ever. But for the rest of the world, it'll be the best time ever. It'll be the golden age. It'll be utopia for the rest of you, living relatively peace and safety from the larger picture, big picture point of view. But the point I'm trying to focus now is that just when the rapture happens and God cracks the sky with the brilliance of the supernatural glory of God, well, right after all the luminaries in the universe go dark, sun, moon, stars, things like that. And then the brilliance, the supernatural glory of God lights up the sky everywhere at the same time on planet Earth. So we're talking about a theophany. At that moment, that's when the supernatural kicks in. All the other seals up to that point, seal 1 through 5, are essentially bad things that could happen either because of nature gone bad or man's fury against other human beings. In other words, it's not supernatural. It's things that could happen, have happened during some world wars, humans killing other humans in mass degree and in mass numbers, things like that. People dying because of earthquakes or natural disasters, even shooting stars and things like that. Lots of famines and earthquakes and pestilence. Those are all things that we've seen before, nothing supernatural. But when we get to the sixth seal, suddenly the supernatural kicks in. And what happens to the people on earth? They flee to caves and rocks and holes in the ground from the fearful presence of the Lord. Notice that Isaiah is saying that they're trying to get away from God's presence. They're trying to get away from him who sits on the throne and from the face of the Lamb. Right? Revelation gives us both of them. They're trying to get away. This is the rapture. This is Jesus coming in power and glory with his angels to gather his elect. But notice, at the battle of Armageddon, I'm speaking to you post-tribbers now, okay? You pre-tribbers, you can just sit back and relax for a moment. Listen up, post-tribbers. You try to say, well, the rapture and the second coming are the same event. Really? Look at the reaction of the earth dwellers. In the rapture, they're running for their lives in fear. Let's crawl down into the cracks like cockroaches. We need to get away from this supernatural presence of the Lord. They look up in the sky and they see God himself, something that God allows to happen, right? He peels back the sky like a scroll. I mean, I'm getting like little goosebumps up the back of my neck when I talk about that event. That's not going to be some Hollywood version, right? That's going to be God peeking in going, hello, right? They see that and they're freaked out for good reason, because they've been living in unrestrained sin up to this point. They've been having their way, and yet now God's intervening. God is invading humanity with his divine presence, with his divine Messiah, and they run in fear. They flee for their lives. They try to crawl into the holes in the ground from the presence of the Lord. But what are they doing at the Battle of Armageddon? They're doing the opposite. Antichrist is massing his armies in Jerusalem to fight against Yeshua. And he's got all these people of the earth following after him, the commanders, the great men, the leaders of the earth, anyone who wants to take up arms against Jesus. They are going after God. They're massing together. They're not running away from him. So how can we say that these events are the same event? Look at the reaction of the people. Some people are going to say, no, that's just speculation. No, they're really the same event. No, seriously, I think the pictures that the Bible is painting for us are unmistakable that these are two separate events. At the very least, separated by some amount of time. Is it 7 years like the pre-tribbers say? I don't think so. Too much speculation on the secret rapture, anytime rapture, signless rapture. That also doesn't fit with the picture of a very noisy rapture, one where every eye will see him, one where people are running trying to flee into the very cracks in the ground to get away from the presence of God. So that pre-trib version of a rapture is faulty. It's deficient. But with equal sadness, I declare that the post-trib, you guys have gotten it. You guys are missing it also. There are two separate events here. The one that Isaiah is describing is a rapture event where the reaction of the people on planet Earth when they see the coming of the Lord is, let's get away from this. We need to get out of here. We're not going to fight him. We're going to get away. I know some of you are going to say, that's the people saying that, but the commanders are saying something else. No, go back to Revelation again. Revelation doesn't give us that. Revelation says, starting in verse 15, then the kings of the earth and the eminent people and the commanders, that's a military phrase there, by the way, and the wealthy and the strong and every slave and free person hid themselves in the caves and on the rocks and the mountains. So John's description in 15 is basically everybody, right? Because he talks about the kings of the earth, the eminent people, the commanders, and the wealthy, and the strong, and then all the slave people. But Isaiah just says people will flee to the caves, the rocks, and the holes. So the point I'm trying to make is that it seems apparent to me that these are two separate events that are separated by enough of a time period, which it really easily lines up with the Prewrath model, enough of a time period that allows for the people to have a different perspective of God when it comes time for Jesus to return in glory and do battle at the Battle of Armageddon. By that point in time, they've already experienced so much trumpet and bold judgments that they are ready to fight against God. Right? They've lost their minds. They think they can take on God, but that's what Antichrist will convince them of. The unclean spirits that are poured out. I've got to read this. I'm digressing a bit, but it's okay. Let's jump all the way down to Revelation chapter 19 so you can, well, not chapter 19 just yet. I think go back up to 16. If we look at starting with the sixth angel, this is the bowl judgments. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river, the Euphrates, and its water dried up so that the way would be prepared for the kings from the east. So we're talking about the prep for the Battle of Armageddon. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, we're in Revelation 16 starting verse 13. I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs, for they are spirits of demons performing signs, which do what? Go out to the kings, the people that are mentioned in Revelation chapter 6 earlier. Wow, didn't mean to do that. Give me a second. In Revelation 6, Why do I keep doing that? Sorry, give me a second. In verse 15 of Revelation 6, the kings of the earth, the eminent people, the commanders, and the wealthy and the strong. But in verse 16, we have these unclean spirits like frogs going out to the kings of the entire world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God, which is the battle of Armageddon. The Almighty, behold, I'm coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and keeps his clothes so that he will not walk about naked and people will not see his shame. And they gathered them together in the place which is in Hebrews called Armageddon. So this is the prep for the battle of Armageddon. And then later on, in chapter 19, we see the part of the battle actually take place. Yeshua returns on a white horse, and he does battle with these people. My point is that these are clearly two different events. Look at the reactions of the people. Look at where they're massing. Look at what they're doing. In the rapture event, they're running away from God, and in the second coming, they're running to fight God. They're being drawn by unclean spirits to fight after God, and they're massing together in this great valley, which actually is actually going to be synonymous with Jerusalem later on. So let's go back to Brother Eggman. Reading through Isaiah, right? This is where I'm getting this theology about that they're different things that are going on. I'm not just making up from the New Testament. In that day, people will throw away to the moles and the bats their idols of silver and idols of gold, which they made to worship. They will flee to caverns and to the overhanging crags from the fearful presence of the Lord and the splendor of his majesty when he arises to shake the earth. Again, the language there is going to carry over into the book of Revelation. Yes, there is a little bit of conflation between what we would call rapture language and second coming language, because from Isaiah's vantage point, God simply showed him the day of the Lord, one coming, which is accurate in his theology. There is only one coming. The day of the Lord is one coming, one parousia. And so sometimes when you zoom out, you don't see the rapture on the front end and the second coming on the back end. You just see one coming. You see one coming, and the events that are described are kind of conflated together, where the reactions of the different people doing certain things. But when we get to the New Testament, book of Revelation, we have all the unpacking of those details. We zoom in, and John gives us a closer look at, there are two bookend events related with the one single parousia of the Lord. Let's keep reading Brother Joel, and I'll finish this out tonight. The man of lawlessness, these are Brother Eggman's words. The man of lawlessness rises to world prominence during the Great Tribulation. He will be exalted as a god, and the world will buy the deception and worship him. Just as I was mentioning earlier, if I wouldn't have interrupted him. The day of the day of the tribulation, the time period of the tribulation, right here, the Great Tribulation is Satan's day. God gives it to him. Daniel foretells this, 42 months, 1260 days, 3.5 years, time times and half a time. God gives him this time. God cuts the tribulation short, but he doesn't cut Satan's reign short. Satan doesn't get cut short. He doesn't lose this power, this time frame. He doesn't get kicked off his temporary throne until the day of the Lord has run its course, which is really the final 3.5 years, and then there's 30 days after that in which the bowl judgments are poured out upon his kingdom, and that's when he's really brought to a proper end. But the point I'm trying to make is that the 3.5 years isn't cut short. It's only the Great Tribulation, which began at the midpoint, that is cut short. But we still give Satan the full 3.5 years to overcome the saints, to wear them out, to persecute them, and to kill us, to defeat us. So it is Satan's day. It is his wrath being poured out, and it is his name that is being exalted in that day. But by comparison, like Brother Eggman's going to go on to say, I believe, God has his name exalted in the day of the Lord. So the man of lawlessness and his followers are humbled during the day of the Lord, and the Lord alone will be exalted. Right there it is. So those are the two sections that we're highlighting and comparing and contrasting. Satan's wrath on the left side of my proverbial screen. Let's try that again. Satan's wrath, maybe if I just zoom in to these two parts, is what I'm kind of focusing on right now, so you can zoom out a little bit. There we go. We're talking about these two sections, the Great Tribulation on the left side of your screen, compared and contrasted against the day of the Lord on the right side of the screen, separated in the middle by the pre-wrath rapture itself. During the Great Tribulation, Satan is exalted, and there's relative peace and safety for those who take the mark, those who owe their allegiance to Antichrist, those who worship him and bow down to him and do what he says. He will, for the most part, protect you. But by comparison, in other words, let me finish describing during the Great Tribulation, Satan is exalted, and Satan declares war against God's people, Jews and Christians. By comparison and contrast, during the right side of the screen events, the day of the Lord, which is interrupted by the rapture itself, also the resurrection, God's wrath is poured out against Satan's kingdom. So God declares war on Satan. Satan is no longer exalted. God alone is exalted in the day of the Lord. God alone will be the focus of the people's attention, not in worship, sadly, but in fear and in anger and in rebellion. At this point in time, God has hardened their hearts so much that it's nearly impossible for them to repent. In fact, God won't even allow some of them to die for 5 months, right? Death is even taken away from human beings. So God's wrath is exalted on that day. God's wrath and God's name, he alone will be exalted. So, Brother Eggman, let me back up there. The man of lawlessness and his followers are humbled during the day of the Lord, and the Lord alone will be exalted. Whereas during the Great Tribulation, the man of lawlessness erects idols of himself all over the earth. The day of the Lord marks the time these idols are destroyed and taken down. The man of lawlessness establishes his throne during the Great Tribulation, but God topples his kingdom during the day of the Lord. Are you beginning to see it? Can you guys see the differences now between these two time periods and why it's necessary for us not to conflate them and confuse them and speak of the Great Tribulation as if it's the wrath of God and speak of the wrath of God as if it's the Great Tribulation? It's to insult the passages that we just read about and to insult the fact that God must have his day because he alone is God. Even though Satan exalts himself during his day, in the end, we know that he's not God. But the people who worship him will think he's God, but they're deceived. In fact, Paul tells us in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that not only will a great deception be sweeping over the earth, right? Antichrist and his demonic deception, but God will send them a strong delusion. Who's the them? The earth dwellers, the people who refuse to believe the truth that could save them, the people who are in open rebellion against God. They have already determined in their hearts that they are not going to surrender to God's lordship, to Yeshua's lordship. They have rejected the words of truth, the words of life, the very scriptural, the gospel itself. They've rejected that. They've thrown that off. And therefore, God has given them over to a debased heart and a debased mind to follow after all their own licentiousness and their own hedonism and their own pleasures. So that's why I described the time period of the Great Tribulation as only tribulation for essentially those who resist Antichrist, namely Jews and Christians. But for the rest of the world, it'll be party hardy, right? I mean, why not? Satan is going to take care of you if you take the mark. So the man of lawlessness establishes his throne during the Great Tribulation. We've got to see that in order to understand why the Lord alone must be exalted in the day of the Lord when God topples his kingdom during that time frame. Let's keep reading, Brother Eggman. I'm going to finish this tonight.